Hello, friends. This is Tammy Brunk, Earth Sky Woman, with a full moon in Aries oracle for you today. Speaking to you on Wednesday, October 16th, the super, super, super duper full moon in Aries, almost eclipse, is going to be tomorrow morning on the 17th of October. And so tonight, for those of you able to hear this in time, tonight is really going to be the biggest, brightest moon, but tomorrow night is going to be incredibly close and beautiful and bright as well. The reason it's a super full moon and it's the fourth in a row actually, and the brightest and biggest of the year is because it's at its closest to the Earth for the year. So, and it's actually what we call perigee is when it's at its closest point to the Earth. That's like 11 hours before the exact full moon, which is at about 7:30 Central Time AM. So tonight, when you see it up in the sky, it's going to be really, really close to the Earth. So we're going to feel the effect of it much more strongly than we would otherwise. Um, I'm saying that it's almost an eclipse because it is in the sign that we have the North Node in, and so there's this way that this moon is continuing the themes that we've been moving through since July of 2023, when the nodes moved into the North Node moved into Aries and the South Node moved into Libra. So this is really amplifying all the themes that we've been working through since that time. And I'm going to kind of simplify what that, so this has everything to do with um, the axis, the polar, we say polar resonant, or the axis of polarity between the sign of Aries and the sign of Libra, because the nodes of the moon, they shift about every 2 years, and whatever they shift into is really helping us understand what the how as a humanity we can align ourselves in a good way, and we can kind of tune ourselves to true north. How do we align ourselves with our destiny as a human species? So it's a collective thing. And it gives us clues as to where we're really needing to do a lot of healing, a lot of clearing, a lot of, housekeeping in a sense. And that's the South Node sign. So, first, the polarity of Aries Libra is really about this tension between um, being able to be who I am, just really fully who I am, and the tension that comes when I am trying to learn how to be who I am and fully express without shutting myself down. I'm trying to learn to do that in a way that is also going to create space for others to be who they are, and also to do it in such a way that it actually fosters connection and strong bonds with others rather than being something where we're kind of pushing other people away. And this is, I think that in these years, these 2020 to 2024, I would say actually from 2017 to 2024 have been massive watershed years of this crossing of a threshold. And as a collective, and from my perspective, this Aries Libra axis is there's a reason that this is coming up right now, because it is the thing that we're really wanting and needing to work through. And it brings to mind this interview that I was just listening to today with Gabor Mate, the trauma specialist therapist from Canada, who really has brought an awareness of the impacts of trauma to the collective in such a strong way. And what he was speaking to was a study that was recently done by a woman who was working with a physician who was working with people and palliative care who were dying of cancer or some other illness, much far beyond their earlier than their time, than the normal death age average, however you would say that. And the number one regret people had was that they didn't feel like they had authentically been who they were. That was really striking to me that he said that. And that's the Aries dilemma. It's the challenge that we as humans need so deeply to belong, and we want so much to be able to connect emotionally with others and to be seen and heard and loved, but at the same time we have this authentic need to be who we are, to just express our emotions, to be seen just innately as valuable, just as who we are. And those two things often come into conflict, early on in our society. And so the way this might have shown up for many of us is that since July of 2023, we have been doing this incredibly powerful, deep work around healing patterns of people pleasing, of codependencies. We've probably been, I know I have been, had to be kind of toe to toe, nose to nose with the core wounding from my earliest childhood. Many of us have been doing that work, and it is not pretty. It can sometimes feel like regression when what it really is a retracing, which is a concept that sometimes when we're healing, we have to kind of go back through and experience what we had experienced before so that we can more fully integrate it. And this is a process that repeats, right? Even though we want to have this be a linear process, it's circular. So this has been the big theme since July of 2023. And I just invite you to really consider, I'm asking people to do this in lots of ways, to consider, how have you grown? Where have you really stretched yourself to be more authentic and be more genuine, even when it was scary, and especially in your closest relationships with your parents or with your siblings or with your partner or with your children or close friends, colleagues. Um, where have you, because I think it can be actually very easy to be hard on ourselves about this. Because this is some of the most deeply vulnerable, messy territory, but how can we look back and say, okay, I can think of all of these periods where I've been far more authentic and vulnerable and maybe awkward in my relating with these people who are close to me. And I have had instances that have been very uncomfortable where I've kind of stood in the truth of who I am, maybe for longer than normal. And where have I done that? And how can I honor how challenging that is and the depth of that work? So that's a big piece of what we've been up to. And it's so essential because we, in this massive crossing, now I've been thinking of it ever since learning from Rory Duff when I went to Ireland. Um, he refers to this moment we're in as crossing the abyss, and this massive threshold that we're crossing, and that this fall, this winter, is especially a massive crossing of sorts. And I think we all feel it. I think many of us feel similarly to, I know many astrologers and many of those who practice wanting to look behind the veils or understanding future emergent patterns. Many of us feel very similarly to the way we did before 2020, in the fall of 2019, if you remember. It's that, and I feel it as an astrologer as this kind of locking of the throat sometimes, like, wow, this is big energy. What are we moving into? How do I support people in moving through this big passage and not cause more fear or more contraction? Because really what's needed now is more than ever a practice and practices to move more quickly into a more regulated nervous system. So we have our creativity, we have our flexibility, we have our we're fully online to respond to the situations that we're going through. So, we don't know what this crossing looks or feels like. Rory would say it's actually about consciousness. He would say that it's because we're moving through the galactic current, and that this is something that happens about every 13,000 years. It's another way of talking about the way that, I often talk about how we, at the winter and summer solstices, our our solstice sun and basically the earth is aligned with the galactic equator. So galactic center and the edge of the galaxy are both lined up with the winter and summer solstice sun. And so this is something that can only happen every 13,000 years, around about that. And so part of what happens with that, Rory was helping me understand that more, is that we're moving through the galactic current sheet. And how that works is it actually functions to make it so that the magnetic field of Mother Earth it's more porous, it's more thin, so it's allowing in more galactic or in more cosmic energies. And so that the sun's energies now that, and the sun is in this massive solar maximum period, and so the sun's light is also its potency is amplified, as and we can see that the impact of the sun's rays on the earth is massive right now, just with all the auroras. I mean, that is a beautiful, a gorgeous experience that we get to see, but also it's a demonstration of the massive earth changes that are the the electromagnetic kind of energetics that the earth is experiencing right now that also impact our bodies. So getting back to what Rory Duff would say about this crossing of a threshold, that a lot of what it has to do with is moving even more deeply from this age of separation and fully moving into this age of unity. And so we're continuing to move through that threshold as we have been, arguably since the mid 60s. Some would say that's when the sun moved within a degree of that galactic alignment. And beginning in 2017, there are many reasons why we can say that it really amped up then. Of course, 2012 as well. High plane, high helicopter. um, and so, clearly everything's been accelerating and we are growing spiritually. Our bodies are being impacted by what's happening to the earth. And I do believe that there is something about this um, that is about our evolution and is about amplifying and accelerating this massive metamorphosis and change in who we are as a species and who our earth is, and that it's necessary and that it's cyclic and that it's going to be taking us into a better place than where we've been. I tend to agree with I don't know how you couldn't at this stage. I keep wanting to do a course that is just laying out all the prophecies and all the different shifting of ages and all the different, there's so many ways to look at this moment. I think it's useful to be able to kind of look at them all in one place. Um, but regardless, this winter, we're moving even more deeply into that current. And so what that means partly is that we are really needing to, so I'm going to break it down into the Aries territory and the Libra territory. So from the perspective of Aries, with the Aries North Node and with this Aries full moon, which is amplifying these themes. Um, the emphasis and the progressive or forward movement comes when we take full radical responsibility for what is ours. And we are courageous enough to know, this is mine. I'm going to take responsibility for moving in the direction of where my soul wants to go. And that has a lot to do with sovereignty. It has a lot to do with healthy individuation, healthy differentiation, healthy choosing to be fully who we are. And then from the Libra end of things, that maybe has more to do with the movement into greater unity consciousness or learning. It's almost like once we've matured on the level of knowing who we are and being able to act from a place of kind of innocence and instinct and genuineness, then we cultivate a greater capacity to actually be more peaceful and to actually be more co-creative and to actually be more collaborative and to step into the field of greater unity. So this isn't about perfection, because I think a lot of what's needed, this has to do actually with the way that, because I'm going to get back to this full moon now. Okay, so all these themes I'm talking about, the reason I'm bringing it up is because this full moon didn't happen in a vacuum. It's a continuation and an amplification and the final full moon, and that is activating in such a powerful way these themes of the nodes, because they're going to shift early next year into Pisces and Virgo. So this is what's been active since that time. And so now to add a few layers. So this Aries full moon, again, it's at perigee, it's very close. So we're really going to feel it, in our emotional bodies and our physical bodies. We're going to be really feeling the energetics of this full moon. It's an opportunity to do some beautiful work, and not just tonight, not just tomorrow, but really for a number of days, moving into the weekend. I think we're still going to be able to work powerfully with this medicine. But and clearly, until the nodes shift, that so everything I'm talking about, it's going to be continue to be amplified through the remainder of this year. But this is a exclamation point. This is a point where we can really deepen that work. So also to understand that it is a cardinal grand cross. So as a cardinal grand cross, that means, I'm going to actually draw up the chart now. I'm going to pull up the chart so you can look at it. So The cardinal signs are, of course, Libra, Aries, and Cancer and Capricorn. And in shamanic astrology, the training that I received and that I am now kind of evolving into my own version, which I'm referring to as emergent astrology, um, from this frame, we look at the cardinal signs as culture creating or householder signs. They are the astrological signs that have to do with how it is that we be with other humans, how we create community, how we relate in our deepest, most intimate bonds, how we parent, how we engage with very immediate local community. Um, as well as this global village that we're now a part of. So how do we people, I like to say it like that, how do we connect with others and how do we learn to belong? And at the turning of the ages, I would say, kind of like with the Bodhisattva's creed, the way that it expanded, so that originally it was said that the Bodhisattva is the enlightened master who, instead of returning to source or the light, they vow to continue to incarnate on planet Earth until all humans are liberated. But recently, that was updated to include all life, all beings. And so, like that, I would say that we're in this moment where um, there is this inclusion with the cardinal signs of all the peoples, not just the human people, but those blue jays over there who are calling right now, or the deer that I saw earlier today, or the trees, that it's all the people, all the personhoods. um, and so that's included in that, I talked about this in the last eclipse. The last eclipse excuse me, video that I did, and about this indigenous perspective from the Lakota view of the all my relations. It's a very Libra concept that we be in right relationship with all of the members of our family of life. So that's what Libra and Aries are kind of inviting us into. And this is a cardinal grand cross because we have Mars. It's kind of a wide orb with Pluto, because Pluto is at the very last degrees of Capricorn, and that is also a very strongly featured energetic of this full moon. But it's within what, 6 degrees, 7 degrees, and then of an opposition. And then you've got that squaring. So the sun is really squaring Mars and squaring Pluto, and the moon, the sun and the moon, the full sun and moon are squaring those two planetary bodies. So it's a cardinal grand cross, and anytime we have a grand cross, there can be this experience. I remember I had an insight at one point that we all kind of know it can be quite challenging. So if you've been feeling this kind of tension inside your body, just like this, like this, just this really strong kind of working tension, I'm going to encourage you to consider that this is kind of like the way that a diamond is made. It's kind of like the way that a pearl is made. There's some intensive kind of tension that we are being put through right now, emotionally, especially, and physically, that is refining us. And another way that I've sometimes seen it is that, if you have a square and then you have a circle, sometimes we could see that the square it's a sacred geometric form, just like the circle is, but you could say it's a bit more young or a bit more masculine. And a beautiful thing about the square is it really does hold things in a really strong way. So, the square can feel just uncomfortable sometimes, but the way it works us, it builds a lot of spiritual and emotional muscle. So I'm going to encourage you to consider that's part of it. And I'll give an example of how that works is that, um, well, and I need to add in a couple more features here because part of the discomfort is added to because we have Pluto that is at the very, very last degrees of Capricorn. I mean, that in and of itself is just unbelievably potent and intense. It's like we collectively are working through the very last vestiges of the heart of this patriarchal system that we've all been a part of and at the effect of, and all the top down systems and massive inequalities. And we are at the late stages of predatory capitalism and what that does to our souls. All these things kind of belong in that realm of Pluto in Capricorn, and what Pluto's been working hard to help us compost. But we're in that last gasp there, that's what we're feeling. So Pluto's in the field because Pluto stationed direct a week ago on the 11th. And when a planet this that it moves this slowly and is this potent like Pluto, when it stations, you're going to feel it for about two sides on either weeks on either side. And so Pluto is really very strongly, not only because it's squaring the sun and the moon, but also because it's very close to the earth as well. So it's very powerfully felt. And so you've got this square to the sun and the moon with Pluto. So what do we do with Pluto? It's just feeling the feelings. It's sometimes feeling powerlessness. There is this need. Again, we're getting worked. And so part of it is, I sent out an email saying, talking about vision carriers. And part of the reason I did that is because, again, this is Aries energy, and there is something about wanting to move forward. And I would continue to say that when we have this much intensity in the world around us, part of what's essential is to, when we are able to cultivate a vision for a future that we really want to live in, and to consider what kind of a life do we want to live, what kind of a world we want to live in, because we need to kind of create that line from now into the future so that we have this, we're kind of pulled forward by something greater than ourselves. Um, at the same time, the energetics of this full moon are so great that for many people, it might just be that it's like, okay, I'm going to do a lot of breath work, or I'm going to just walk a lot, or I am going to, um, kind of do my best to stay in my body. That might be a massive accomplishment when you have this level of intense energies. Because the other thing about it is that this full moon, well, there are two other features, three actually. One is we've got Juno conjunct the sun, and I see that as a really beautiful and a positive activation. Juno has is an asteroid that is deeply connected to marriage, to our closest love bonds and partnerships. And it also has to do with sacred finance, sacred money. And, I see that as deeply promising, because if there's anything that we are really needing, I think, as a collective right now, in terms of how it is that we can learn to be in really harmonious and intimate and deeply connected relationship with others, it's to heal our money paradigm. Because really, if you look around at our modern reality, what keeps us separate from each other, what keeps us kind of locked in these loops of prioritizing everything except the strength and the beauty and the I want to say playfulness of our bonds. And it's the ways that so many people feel very crunched to make ends meet, especially in our current economy. So I see that as a very hopeful seed that's being planted with Juno Moneta, with the sun, in terms of how do we heal our current economic paradigm. That is front and center, absolutely, right now. And you're going to see that more and more over the coming months and coming years. This is the theme right now, is this is what must be healed. So whatever's happening right now this week on the world stage, know that there's this seed that's being planted for a more egalitarian, more equal, more conscious relationship with money. All right, so then we have the Chiron that's also on the moon, or close to the moon. And we have been moving through this Chiron and Aries cycle since 2010. Those of my generation, many of them, Gen X is one of the annoying ways they refer to my generation. Many of us are Aries Chiron generation. And there is something really profoundly wounded around who we are and who our identity is. And I think part of that really does have to do with the coming of age during the Cold War, and the threat of nuclear annihilation. I think that is something that we carry in our genetic encoding, that is this kind of awakening of this primal kind of fear of we could just not exist. I think that's part of what this Chiron and Aries wound is about. But the gift, because Chiron always carries a gift, the gift of Chiron and Aries is, one of them is this deep, profound compassion for the predicament that we find ourselves in as a collective now, and for the tenuousness of what it means to exist, to take up space, to have a self, to assert our right to be. There's, in a sense, the sometimes people pleasing or self-sacrificing nature of, on one end of the spectrum. It's not all Chiron and Aries, but many can carry that the quality of self-sacrifice or not having a strong identity. The other side of that is that there can be kind of a self-correction from this overdeveloped sense of entitlement, right? So that's part of what my generation, as awkward as we can sometimes be, there's this kind of trying to work through, how is it that I can assert myself as having a right to be here, and at the same time not have my presence as a human be something that causes more harm to planet Earth and those members of our human family who have so little, or who are enduring the horrors of war largely because of our empire, right? Those kinds of things haunt the Chiron and Aries generation. And, I think we're here to help to mend and heal those things. But many of us are sensitives. And so how we do that is part of the challenge. And add to that, many of us are also the Pluto and Libra generation. And that also adds to, on the shadow side, the people pleasing, but on the beneficial side, a real desire to create contexts and containers where every place around the wheel, every way of being human is deeply honored and appreciated and included. Which brings me to the final part of this full moon that is actually, I think, the most astonishing and very powerful. And that has to do with this asteroid right here, Eris. And Eris is almost exactly conjunct this moon opposite the sun at 24 Aries. And so, who is Eris? Who is the asteroid Eris? Well, she's a very slow moving planetary body, very large. Really one of the most significant and deeply felt asteroids in our pantheon of celestial bodies. And she's been in Aries for quite some time. I can't recall exactly when she moved in, but anybody who's alive today is going to have Eris and Aries. So it's the time we're moving through is an Eris and Aries period. Um, so who she is, though, is she is, among other things, she is the one who is exiled. Eris is the outcast. Eris is the exile. She is the one who is not included in the circle. I'm not going to go into the whole myth. You can look it up, but she is the female, the goddess. She's also the sister to Ares, the god of war, and that's very telling. That is, it is the female warrior, the one who has this primal courage, and the one who has this very strong sense of agency. She's the one who has the deepest wounding of not being included. And my sense more and more is that that is the biggest challenge right now for us as a humanity, is to reconcile the women in our communities and those who carry more of the feminine qualities, for those of us to reclaim and bring back into the circle the part of us that has been um that is that we don't favor. This is, yes, it's shadow work, but it's very specific shadow work. It's the part of us that we might think is discordant, that doesn't know how to get along, that's quite rebellious, that is in a sense gonna, throw a wrench into whatever the collective agreements are. And the reason she does that is because the collective agreements are not in balance. They're not correct. They're not just. And so, I've had, actually, interestingly, I feel her to be very similar to Black Moon Lilith. I've talked a lot about Lilith. I've talked as well a lot about the fact that Uranus right now continues to be very, very close, and for a very long time, to Algol, the fixed star that is the third eye of Medusa. And so that's the demon star. So there's a lot of this energy, not to mention that Venus evening star, Inanna evening star, is accompanied by demons in the stories of Inanna when she is ascending from the underworld, the great below, on her ascent. And so part of her work is to reconcile with her own inner demons. And when we meet our demons, and when we invite them to tea, when we have a really, when we include them in the circle, then we gain their gifts. Then they become our daemons. They become our guiding tutelary spirits. They become a zone of genius for us. So to be more specific about that, I've just been considering this today and in the last several months. What is it that we don't allow? What is it that we really, even, or maybe especially those of us who are progressives, would see as negative? And but on all sides, what do we see as not worthy of being included? And to be very, very aware of what that is inside of ourselves and in the world around us, to be very acutely conscious of our judgments and what that does to separate us from ourselves and from others, and to create a soft space around that and allow that to kind of soften and to get curious about why that is. And I'll give the example. Recently, I was just out on this beautiful piece of land by the river that my friend he's working with the Nature Conservancy, and it's 180 acres that was donated, and it's going to be a beautiful um, example. It's going to be kind of a educational center for landowners to look at different ways that they can manage the river bottoms. And when I was out there, I was looking at some of the invasive species, some of the species that our local Missouri Conservation Department, they're a wonderful agency, but they have a whole list. And I was seeing a lot of those plants, a whole list of all the invasive species that are, landowners are encouraged to remove, almost always with glyphosate, with Roundup. I mean, that's what they would recommend, especially something like honeysuckle. So, I'm not the only one. I have a lot of friends, peers who we've had this conversation. It just comes up. That what's interesting is when you start to do a little bit of research and digging into some of these species, again, like Japanese honeysuckle, or there's another species that I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a big mint. And these species in their native lands are incredibly powerful medicines and foods. Japanese honeysuckle is now endangered in Japan, but they would tend to grow it as a cultivar, and they use it in some regions as Chinese medicine, as a really potent healer. You have this other big mint. I wish I could remember its name, but I remember when it first showed up. It looks like basil. I remember when it first showed up in the creek years ago, maybe 2017. I think it showed up in this area. And I remember seeing it with my sister, and it was purple. And we were both like, where did that come from? And we smelled it. It was very aromatic. It's a beautiful, stunning plant. Looked very familiar. Looked a lot like basil. Um, and then in the years after, I asked my mom, I asked my friend Patty, both women who have been gardeners for years, who know the land very well. I was like, because it had popped up everywhere. I'm like, do you know what this is? Do you remember? Because I don't remember this as a child. And they both were like, oh no, it's been around. And which surprised me. But I came to learn that it is a very, very, very important leaf in Korean cuisine. So it's from Asia, and it's, in Korean cuisine they use it. They stack it kind of like you would with a grape leaf with a dolma. And they also make an oil out of the leaf that's very commonly used. And I just wish I could find the name of it. Somebody watching, maybe put it in there. Perilla, I think is what it's called. So, they're just fields full of this. And the Department of Conservation, they're some of these plants, they tend to crowd out the natives. And so, what do you do with them? So my feeling is actually when I was in New Mexico this last year, I started seeing them in a different way. I started seeing Russian olives. I started seeing salt cedars, because those are two plants there that are non-native. I started asking, well, what country are they from? What region of the world? What are their symbolic properties? And this is medicine. These plants are medicine for the earth. We don't understand it, but there's a way that they're medicine for the earth. And I'm not saying that there isn't the need to remove them in some cases if they're completely out of balance, but they're telling us something. They're telling us a story. And so I'm just going to circle back around to Eris now to just say that when I was trained as a shamanic astrologer, part of my training as a ceremonialist was to always invite Eris into the circle. When you would open the circle and invite in the guides, allies, angels, all the different beautiful spirits of the land, all of your guardians, when you would make that invitation, the directions, you always wanted to invite Eris, because she is the one who, if you don't invite her into the circle, she's gonna wreak havoc, because she is the one who balances, and like any scapegoat or black sheep of the family, what we understand in a time of crisis like now is we need the ones who are on the edges. We need to bring them into the circle because they have very uncomfortable, often, but vital information for us. So, how is it that the female warrior, how is it that the feminine aspect of the warrior principle, the one who has strong agency, who knows how to stand in her fire, how is it that she has been disallowed within each of us? And how is it that she is needed to be showing up right now to help us get out of this, to help us bring our world back into balance? So she's not showing up for the first time now. She's been in a square to Pluto through this whole window of time since 2019, I believe, maybe even sooner. So she's been very actively working with Pluto in this, again, very uncomfortable square. She's the one who's really been like a, what is that? What is that phrase? Like a burr in the saddle of Capricorn. She's the one who's really been doing a lot of the hard work to break down patriarchy, to break down these institutions that have become too bloated and too distorted our economic, our health, our educational, our other systems. She's the one who is that part of us and the part of the collective and Mother Earth that's just like, no more, no more. And she's not welcomed often at the table. That part of us, that the activists who are speaking out about Palestine and Gaza, she's not welcome often. She doesn't feel good, and so what's the part of us that does not make people feel comfortable, but who is needed as one of the advisors in our inner councils? So that's a huge part of this journey, and this moment with this full moon. And I'm talking about the full moon in Aries, but again, just keep in mind everything I'm talking about, it's going to be continuing. These themes are going to continue at least through November 19th. So this isn't just for a day, for a couple days. These energies I'm speaking to are very pronounced, but they're not just a moment. And so the last thing I'll say is that, when I'm speaking from the perspective of Libra, it's important to also remember that wherever I'm, because we are needing to become peacemakers, which means that we need to move beyond kind of petty divisiveness and into more emotionally mature spaces of learning to approach the stranger or the other with respect and with dignity and with honesty. So that's really what we're being called into. And I think of Eris as the stranger, as the other, as the one that we're not comfortable with. And not just her, but again, Algol and Black Moon Lilith. These are the energies of, the ones who have been cast out, who we don't want to look at. We don't want to look at those images of those children who are burning in a fire. We don't want to look at that, but we have to look at it. It's absolutely vital. And we need to let ourselves be moved so that we feel that fire of sacred rage of love for life. We need to let that activate us. Otherwise, if it gets turned inward and we don't express it outward, then it ends up being this lethargy and this feeling of soul sickness that makes it hard to get up in the morning, and it makes us feel frozen. And we're needing to move beyond that. So I think Eris is the key for us, and Eris and Algol and Medusa and Black Moon Lilith. We have to invite them into the circle so that we can listen to what we haven't wanted to listen to and see what we haven't wanted to see. Because if we're not able to, then we can't move forward in a good way. We can't rebalance what's been out of balance. So the last thing I'll say about that is what I was getting to is, depending on our point of orientation, where I stand, my place in the wheel, my life experience, which is unique to me, my genetic encoding, my family upbringing, my unique roster of traumas and deep gifts and core beauty from my ancestral line. Depending on that, I might look at, for me, Eris might be a child in Gaza. Or for me, depending on my, all those qualities, it might be an Israeli soldier. And my sense is that if we are going to create a culture of peace, we're going to have to hold both of those beings in our hands. And we're going to have to create a space big enough to see the humanity in both. It does not mean that we allow these horrors and this genocide and erasure of a people to continue. But it does mean that we need to humanize the individuals involved and the horrific traumas that are being reactivated and exploited. We're going to have to create a field of neutrality and of transpersonal love so that these issues can be resolved. So I'm just going to leave it there. Um, except one last thing I have to say, the fact that Venus is at 29 degrees, the anaretic final degree of Scorpio. Um, yeah, if you're feeling this, if you are feeling powerless, if you're feeling the cross, again, it can feel like being crucified. It can feel like being immobilized. If you're feeling it, just know you're being worked. Your soul's being worked. And again, do the breath work, do the or. If you are able, what I've been saying, I said to a client this morning, the goddess wants to speak through us. She wants to act through us. She wants to come alive through us. And so it may be for some of you that there is also this massive breakthrough that's happening. So maybe you're waking up at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning and you don't know what to do. Maybe she wants you to do something. Maybe you need to do one or two brave things. You know, many of us, I feel, I am certainly there. We have dreams, we have visions, we have things that we're being, even little things that feel uncomfortable, that we're being shown that we need to do. Now, with the Gemini energy in the fields, it can be very complicated because we might also kind of be trying to decide what happens first. And we're kind of scrambled because we're under a lot of, there's a lot of distraction in the field. So, but I think for most of us, there's something that is almost like, feels like it's tearing at our hearts. Like, I have to do this thing. I have to do this thing. I have to do this thing. And what we tend to do is we tend to think, oh, I need to regulate my nervous system. I need to get this out of my system. I need to get rid of it. But there are some things, if they keep coming back again and again, that it's for us to do them. And in fact, it can make us ill if we don't. And so what I would say is during the window over these next several days and through the weekend, I would suggest that we do one thing or we do two things, up to five things, very brave, courageous things to take action. This is an Aries full moon. Take action towards some of those things. Do a brave, scary thing that is, if it's really scary and then you want to do something very small, consider the big picture. Consider doing something even bigger and scarier. Sometimes the problem is scale. We're actually thinking too small. Do something bigger. Um, be brave. Do that brave, courageous thing. Take that action. Don't be afraid of messing up. Don't be afraid of looking like a fool. Just express. Really, it is like that Book of Thomas verse about how if you don't, I'm not going to say this right, if you don't express what is inside of you, then it can destroy you. So we have to take what's inside of us. We have to be able to express that. And it feels like the whole forest right now is saying, agreeing with me, because there's a lot of noise, a little frog again, some kind of little mouse rustling. There's the frog again. Timeline leaping. There's timeline leaping as well to be done. So the other thing that I keep getting is when we take those actions, it can feel like we're really stuck. But when we start to take those actions, my sense is this moment we're in right now is that things can start to move forward very, very fast. So don't let your mind convince you that it's all molasses and that you have to do everything right now, or this, if you feel sluggish, any of those feelings, okay, it, you know, it it's not going to feel this way forever. Things are going to move forward, but you can begin by taking those actions and the next actions. And that can help you move out of that sense of powerlessness. So lots of love. I'm going to leave it there. I'm glad to finally do this. And I hope you enjoy that beautiful full moon tonight, tomorrow night, and maybe tomorrow morning before sunrise. It's going to be gorgeous. And wishing you so much love for this full moon portal and the coming days and weeks. And I'll see you again soon. Lots of love.